You gotta wake up to a world that's real. You gotta rise up and make it feel. Life in full measure is more than just pleasure. Wake up and live.
Hello and welcome. Today is Monday, February the 16th, 2015. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. I have on the line with me Dr. Jim Willie, editor of the Hat-Trick Letter, which is found on his website, goldenjackass.com. At the end of the show, Jim will give a more detailed bio, I suppose, and tell us what he does and about his website, etc. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello and welcome, Jim.
Oh, good to be back. How you doing? I'm doing fine. Doing fine, and just trying to keep up with the fast-moving events. It's the quickening, it's the acceleration of events. It's a mushrooming of chaos, really.
Yes, you did say that. You've been saying that at the end of last year, the shows we did, the first show we did this year, you said that things would begin to move at breakneck speed, and that is exactly what has been happening. First of all, Jim, I know you've been very busy, so I appreciate that you've taken the time to come and talk to me and my audience. But I understand you have some big breaking news in regards to Swiss banks that seem to have launched their own bail-ins, holding back on multiple billions of dollars from investor accounts. What can you tell us about this unbelievable development and its future consequences, and are Swiss banks ruined?
I think the Swiss banks are exhibiting behavior right now. I've just got got the information last night and today. I did not use the word bail-in. You did. This is not a bail-in. This is a refusal by the Swiss banks to redeem cash outs, withdrawals of accounts at least in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and some at least 4 or 5 billion in dollars. They're primarily euro and Swiss franc accounts. The violations are done by the Swiss banks. I asked if there were financial firms involved and other funds, and he said no, this is just the Swiss banks. They're simply refusing to honor withdrawals and account closures. They're just saying, no, you've got an account here, it's worth X million or X billion, and we're not going to give you your money. So this is not a situation where they're saying we're going to take a portion of it in a bail-in. That's not what I'm saying. These are clients in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and some in Russia, none from the United States. It includes some drug money in the accounts, but these are all redemption requests following the Swiss announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago about removal of their peg with the euro. They're sensing problems. I can't, put myself in the minds of these clients, these customers who want their money, but the Swiss franc is probably not done going up. I've been saying this for a while. The Swiss Central Bank has been sitting on $800 billion or so of euros. I don't think they got rid of all of them in the first round a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So I think there are going to be more, and these clients are nervous about their money. They're nervous about the Swiss banking integrity. They're nervous about a lot of things, including maybe even the breakup of the European Union and fallout that would affect the Swiss banking sector. So we're talking about, I could not get a figure from my source. And by the way, this is not this is a Zurich source. And I'm seeking I'm seeking confirmation from a Liechtenstein source. So this is hard to get confirmation. One thing I've noticed about the Swiss is that when they do some things that are very illegal, they really keep the lid on the information. I mean, they kept the lid on their Madoff funds roll, and they kept the lid on the allocated gold accounts and the thefts of them. Swiss citizens don't know jack about what's going on in their own country. That's what I've come to learn. You got to get your information from outside. So something very big is going on. This has nothing to do with allocated gold accounts. It has to do with big investment accounts in euros and Swiss francs. And I couldn't get a straight answer. I said, are these investment funds that are, locked in bonds and various things? And he said, well, I'm sure there are a variety of types of investments, but just, focus on the fact that there are accounts in the Swiss big banks, the big name accounts, big name banks, and the Swiss banks are refusing redemption and cash withdrawals. And we're talking about, we're probably talking about tens of billions of dollars, maybe $100 billion or more, that the Swiss are refusing to redeem. That's the extent of my information. I'm going to be, updating this for the clients. And it's just more nasty, ugly stuff coming from Switzerland and the banking system. They're a wrecked system. They're ruined. They're ruined. And they've got more losses coming up from, say, Eastern European mortgages, where all those mortgage holders in other countries saw their balances go way up, their loan balances on the home loans. And I don't know much about commercial loans in Swiss franc terms, but the Swiss banks are, proud of their successes in extending home loan mortgages across Europe. Well, they're all in trouble now. We're going to see the Swiss banks drop like flies.
So you think that some of these big banks like UBS or Credit Suisse or something, they might be, going under like Lehman or something?
I think there is the risk of that, yes. They also have claims in progress right now regarding their allocated gold account thefts. You can't just steal someone's gold and put in a certificate saying we'll give you cash. Maybe some of these accounts are related to cash redemptions from the gold accounts, but I was told specifically it has nothing to do with the allocated gold account. So these are, just think of them as big, huge cash accounts in their banks. And they're not permitting them to remove their money. Simple as that. Tens of billions, maybe at least $100 billion involved here.
So do you think then the American banks will be beneficiaries of this, because this money is pulled out of Swiss, it's going to go somewhere?
These are European and Asian and Latin American. So they're going to go home. None of this is U.S. accounts.
So it won't come to the U.S., it'll go back to...
I don't think so. These are European, Asian, and Latin American accounts, and some Russian. So they'll go home.
So then the distrust in the whole Western banking system is at an all-time high then?
I think it's just getting bad, going from bad to worse, and going to get even worse still with more developments, which leads us to, the Greek situation.
So anyways, you keep us posted on this development, because it is really huge. So Greece, let's talk about Greece. This Grexit that we've been hearing about since 2011 and makes my head spin, is still going on. Do you believe that Greece will exit the euro and the EU, and how disruptive will such a move be for Europe and for the West in general?
I think it's going to cause a lot worse problems than even the pessimists are thinking, who put out these scenarios that a chain reaction of contagion. Here's an indication, I think, of how dangerous and risk-filled it is. The European Union Commission, the big banks in Europe, mainly Germany, and the European Central Bank are desperately pleading for the Greeks not to default on their debt. Just think about that for a minute. If this were not really serious, then we just have a default.
But in 2012, I believe, or 11, Greece actually had a default, but then they changed the accounting terminology and they said, no, it's not a default.
Well, they did a restructure, Paul.
Right.
I mean, a default can have a restructure. It doesn't mean the default didn't happen.
Right.
It just meant they were late on an interest payment. They did not honor the terms of the loan contract, and it got restructured. So, restructure really is part of default.
Right.
It's part of the aftermath and repair. If there's no repair, then you just get asset seizures and liquidations and ruin. And, a lot of individuals get ruined. A lot of companies get ruined. People, have their credit records wrecked. But this is at the national level. The Euro Central Bank offered $60 billion in emergency loans. It's so they can make their loan payments, make their term payments. But it's debt upon debt. So since when? I mean, this is the big failure of the Western Central Bank franchise system. They have a debt problem, they have a debt default situation, and they fix it with more debt. That's not a fix. It's not a solution. So, then they have all these different collateral grabs, and there's been a lot of complaints that German banks have made collateral grabs of the Greek assets. They're done with that. There's really not a whole lot more to take collateral seizure on.
You mean the Greeks have no more islands to sell?
Well, actually, what I'm hearing now is that the Chinese are buying islands, port facilities, and other assets in Greece, and now Russian investors are entering the picture. So I would expect sometime soon to see some rather significant Russian investment, partnerships, asset stakes, whatever. But they're going to be competing with the Chinese who are already there. I mean, think of this. The Chinese are all over the world now owning port facilities. It's Los Angeles, Mexico, Brazil, British Columbia, Australia, New Zealand. They own port facilities. So with the Greeks being so prominent in the shipping industry with port facilities, makes perfect sense that the Chinese are going to rush in there too and exploit a bad situation. The Greeks are desperate for cash. They're desperate for money. They're desperate for joint ownership stakes with investment funds flowing in. They call it foreign direct investment. So it's going to happen.
So then is that the leverage that Greece has, that they can tell the EU basically, go stuff yourself because we can go to China and Russia?
I think that's being used right now as a crowbar leverage. And Russia has come in there and said, this happened about a month ago, if you exit the euro, we will do trade with you, Greece, on the food and meats and vegetables and fruits and all that. We'll get rid of the food ban because you wouldn't be part of the European Union, and in a sense you're not part of Europe. So the Russians are very clever in using their leverage. They've got inroads already in Greece, and now they're doing something doubly clever. They're using that Greek success to leverage in Cyprus. And they've won an air base, a military base, and naval ports in Cyprus. Cyprus is an island nation. Cyprus is really called, I'm not sure, but I believe Cyprus means copper in Greek, the Greek language. But if not, then Cyprus is really known for its name as the Copper Island. Mm-hmm. So it's half Greek and half Turk. There was a war that was fought, a civil war that was fought about, I think it was 25 years ago or so, and it was between the Greeks and the Cypriots. I'm sorry, the Greeks and the Turks on Cyprus. The Greeks and the Turks. So Russia is involved in leverage in Greece. This is, even Greenspan said a default is likely on their debt. So why does the Euro Central Bank extend more debt? Why? To increase the size of the default at a later date? I mean, that's the Robert Rubin principle. Screw today. I got that backwards. Screw tomorrow. Let's just fix today.
Right.
Robert Rubin believes that, even if it's 2 or 3 months down the road for buying time, don't worry about it. You can do another damaging fix later, but, put a fix in today, even if it mortgages your future and wrecks your future. That's the Rubin doctrine, they call it. But, this is very significant that the Draghi Euro Central Bank offered $60 billion emergency loans. I mean, even France came forward saying, we are in support of Greece in restructuring their debt. For those who don't know it, Germany is the largest creditor of the Greek debt, and France is second. You have Italy and Spain in smaller roles, so there are four nations in Europe that are involved. There are no good choices for the European bankers. You have either debt forgiveness or debt write-down or debt default, or there's really no benefit in continuation. This is just going to end badly. So regardless of the option taken, whether it's default or forgiveness or write-down or restructure or whatever, you're going to have impairments to the big European banks. Big holes, big losses declared, big write-down, losses for the banks. And there comes your contagion risk. There's a really good quote from the Greek finance minister. This is not a clown. He may be a leftist. I hate the labels. He's a leftist or he's a rightist. He's a fascist or he's a liberal socialist. I don't care. I mean, it does matter, but I get tired of it because a lot of critics like to put a label on a person, then dismiss everything he has to say. This Yanis Varoufakis is the Greek finance minister. He said, a clueless political personnel in denial of the systemic nature of the crisis is pursuing policies akin to carpet bombing the economies of proud European nations in order to save them. He's referring to the austerity programs, the strict budget cuts. I call them poison pills, and I've called them poison pills for over 3 years. We haven't had a single successful austerity budget plan result in economic revival. Not one country. Yet they're constantly being recommended as part of IMF bailout loans. You must cut your budget. You must fix your deficits. The budget cuts result in even worse economic decline and larger budget deficits every single time. So,
maybe there's a method to the madness where then once they have destroyed it, then the vultures can swoop in and buy off all the assets for pennies on the dollar.
Well, I think
that's what the IMF does all over the world, does it not?
I think that is the essence of the strategy on the micro level, but I think there's something bigger going on at the macro level. They're using the austerity budget approach as a lure for the IMF loan packages, but the objective is to wreck the economy in order to make one more wrecked economy after another wrecked economy and then bring about your European totalitarian state,
Okay.
which is already in place in a sense because the European Union commissioners are like dictators. They're like czars. They're unelected. Who are they? They're not elected, yet they declared war in Ukraine. They're not elected, yet they make rules. They're not elected. They're dictators. So I think the austerity poison pill is designed to wreck economies. They want to wreck economies. That's their goal. And the United States, with the Ukraine war, I believe, has aided that entire movement of wrecking the European economy. Just look at all the sanctions.
Yes. So now this contagion you're talking about, Jim, like because the Greek debt in the big scheme of things, it's only about 300 billion euro, which is not a huge amount. The ECB could easily, write a check for that tomorrow and QE it, and it could be gone away. So where is the danger of this contagion then?
The contagion is partly in precisely what you said and minimized. The European Central Bank cannot write $200 billion check to cover the debt. That would wreck the euro. The risk is systemic at this point. If they allow the default, then you have the bank contagion all across Europe that would hit London and eventually New York. But if you wreck the euro, what you're going to do by having a large-scale write-down of the entire thing, call it bond monetization, poof, it's gone away, then you're at risk of wrecking the entire euro. I think the Greek, and you can't do that. You just can't do that. Because if you do, you're going to see member nations of the European Monetary Union, the common Eurozone, common Euro region, they'll all say, we're out. We don't want the euro no more. You can't cover the debt with a printing press display, or you will bring about a death of the euro currency. What I heard a humorous proposition by one of the parliamentary members of Greece. This was about a month ago. They said, why don't we just, as a final act and deed, use our Greek central bank privileges and print money, exactly what you just said, print money, print euro, cover our debt, pay off all the bankers in Germany and France and Italy and Spain and elsewhere. Let's cover all our debt and say, screw you all. Okay, that would kill the euro. So the Greeks have a proposal to carpet bomb in return. And I don't know if they're going to do it. I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to do a standard kind of a default and maybe pay 20 cents on the dollar, 20%. I don't know what they call a centavo in the euro. Pay 20 cents on pay 20% of the debt, and maybe forfeit some more of their assets. But honestly, I think it's going to become much uglier than that in Greece. I think they're just going to say, we're done. We don't want you touching our assets anymore. We're defaulting on the entire debt. We're done. That's what I think is coming. When we're out of the euro, we're going back to the drachma. And, they're going to have different problems when that comes. They're going to have to devaluate the drachma and, encourage trade and investment in their own country. That's a different chapter altogether I don't want to touch right now.
But then, they've already had so many severe problems. How much worse can it get? And this breakup of the euro, I suppose it will set in motion some dominoes related to derivatives and all that. That would blow up the whole German banking and French and in the UK. So I suppose that's why the powers that be in Europe are very desperate not to let this happen. But right. You think it's going to happen anyways?
Well, it's going to happen from the left side or the right side. I gave two alternatives: the the Greeks are going to just default altogether and wreck the banks, maybe with a bunch of printed money, which would be a gigantic FU for the euro. But on the other side, you've got the Euro Central Bank with Draghi offering $60 billion. You cannot ignore the fact that the Euro Central Bank is desperate to cover this debt or to continue the flow of payments.
Didn't they also extend these emergency loans to Italy and Spain as well, who are also in desperate situation?
Yeah, and the Euro Central Bank has been buying on a grand scale sovereign debt across all southern Europe. Take a look at the bond yields in France and Spain and Italy. They're back at really nice, healthy levels again, like there's no crisis. This is the undermine of the entire euro. They're using printed money, QE, whether it's dollar swap or euro direct, I don't care. They're printing money covering sovereign debt, and they want to cover some of the Greek debt. And the Greeks are saying, no, we're done. We don't want this anymore. We want to get out. We want to default on the debt, get out of the union, and go back to the drachma. Screw you all. We're sick of your exploitation. We're sick of your asset seizures. We're sick of your entire behavior as creditor. We're done. We want the default. So they're using Russia as a little bit of leverage now, and it's getting really interesting. This is going to result in bank failures and derivative failures, like you mentioned. There's no avoiding it, and it doesn't really matter whether it comes from the left side or the right side, or comes from the market or a direct slam door on default of a debt. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen. It's not avoidable. But Draghi is trying to buy a little more time. These guys look desperate, Paul. Desperate.
They do. I agree with you. They do.
Not the Greeks. The Greeks look comfortable.
Well, they're in the driver's seat, so you know what? They have another big meetings and all that going on today, so we'll find out later what will happen. We'll keep an eye on Greece, and as far as I'm concerned, I hope they blow all the bloody central banks up.
Let me just make a final comment.
Sure.
I forgot to mention the big change agent in the last month is the new parliament, the new prime minister. Or is it president? I can't keep track. When they've got a parliamentary form of government, I tend to think it's a prime minister.
It's a prime minister, yes. In Greece, they have a prime minister.
Well, they've got a rather unusual coalition of right-wing and left-wing elements. This is a unified front against the European Union. They've got fascists, they've got socialists. I would just learn that their finance minister, is a right-winger. Their prime minister is a left-winger. They're united. This is really unprecedented. So the new government was brought into position, was elected. They couldn't rig the election like they do in the United States and Britain and elsewhere. The election was to default. That's the mandate for the election.
Yeah, that's what they keep saying, that they're not going to go back on that, and I really hope they don't. I am still a little bit, cautious at this point whether they will actually be able to leave the euro or not, or there'll be some kind of massive pressure put on them to conform. But I guess we'll have our answer really soon. So now let's move on to this other big story, which you first brought to our attention, more than a year or two ago, about the isolation of the U.S. as opposed to the isolation of Russia. Merkel, Hollande, and Putin, without involving the U.S., UK, negotiated a peace treaty for Ukraine. Such a move of isolating the U.S., UK, and openly negotiating with Russia would have been unthinkable for Germany and France even 5 years ago. So is this a sign of the isolation of the U.S., UK, the Anglo-American cabal vis-a-vis the Minsk truce agreement that was just signed?
it was unprecedented again that a truce summit meeting, a ceasefire, pretty much, this is more than a truce. This was a surrender. This was the American public is going to be the last to know that it appears all indications point the Ukraine war is over. That's what the agreement was. And
unless the CIA, has some fuses that it's going to light somewhere along the way again.
This is where it gets very intriguing and dangerous. You mentioned the Russian leader, Putin, the German leader, Merkel, the French leader, Hollande, but you left out the Ukraine leader. The Ukraine leader, Poroshenko, was there. It was a group of four.
So you think this Poroshenko, sorry to interrupt, he's gone away from the U.S. into the Russian camp now?
It's not a matter of being in a camp. It's a matter of declaring a surrender.
Okay.
I'm not talking camps here.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
So you had Putin, Merkel, Hollande, and Poroshenko basically making an agreement for the end of the war that had all the indications of surrender involved. But they did not. This is the unprecedented element. They did not have any U.S. or British representative at the table.
Yeah, that is so unbelievable for me to see that happening. I was like shaking my head because I've never seen anything like that. I would not have believed it if somebody had told me that, 2 years ago or something, that something like this would happen. I would have said, you're crazy.
Well, here's how it again is unprecedented. This is a mercenary war funded by Langley and Soros. Mercenary war. The mercenaries were not present at the truce surrender table, where the nation was represented by its own president, Poroshenko. So, now you have the U.S., Langley, NATO, Soros, all the outsiders looking in, and the entire world watching them. So will Langley light a fuse? Will NATO withdraw its forces? Here's a big element to the catalyst for making this truce agreement. There's two things. The Germans said, no, no, no. We do not want new lethal American weapons brought in.
Yes.
So Merkel got the pressure from her political side and her industrial sector to step in. They stopped it. This is unprecedented. In effect, just on the point of American weapons coming into Ukraine, the Germans have flipped. The Germans have turned their backs on the Americans and British. It's the US-UK, the Anglo-American axis. The Germans, I think, have now begun the process. This is a very important turning point. They've begun the process of abandoning the Western leadership.
Openly, yes. That's what's really surprising me, that they are that blatant in their move away from.
And here's where it gets a little bit ironic, Paul. If the Germans had not gotten in the way, if the Germans had said, all right, well, go ahead, use the German military base in Ramstein, that's the big issue. If the U.S. was able to use the NATO air base on German soil to provide the weapons to Ukraine, it's not so much my sources, my understanding reading the situation is that the weapons would have found their way into the rebel hands in a matter of 1 week.
In the eastern Ukraine, yeah, I would
Right.
agree.
So, if the lethal weapons were delivered to Ukraine, would they not have been used against the Kiev regime quickly? So, this is part of the whole conflagration element. Merkel actually made a shuttle trip, an unscheduled trip, to Washington and Canada.
Yes, she did.
And I was struggling to find what was her message. And the message that I heard was there were 700 mercenaries and NATO troops, including Blackwater mercenaries, 700 captured, surrounded. They called it the Debaltseve cauldron. Think of just like, an entire city or a major part of the city with some of its suburbs surrounded and being bombarded with mortar shells, artillery shells, maybe even rocket grenades, whatever. But they're being slaughtered. 700. This is what Putin brought to the table to show Merkel and Hollande. A lot of people call him Holland. It's silent H in French. It's Francois Hollande. But I'm told that Putin showed Merkel and Hollande a number of different bits of information. There was a lot of rumors that, maybe we got some definitive information and data regarding satellite imagery of 9/11. That's not new. that started coming out 6 months ago. No, what Putin showed the German and French leaders was information first about the personalities of some of the Western leaders who they're following, like US and British, some of their backgrounds, who they are, how they came to power, who their sponsors are, stuff like that. Putin also showed them definitive information regarding the Malaysian airliner that the Ukrainian military brought down. So this is getting very dangerous, and I think it's the end of the Ukraine war. And Europe understands it all well. The Americans are still going to get the daily Goebbels propaganda bullshit on a regular and frequent basis on the news in the morning, in the noon, and the night, and at 11 p.m. about how the war continues. Because I don't think the U.S. is going to honor this war, and what the U.S. will earn in the process is grotesque isolation.
Maybe that's why Obama wants to launch this new ISIS war, because he probably sees the handwriting in the wall in regards to Ukraine.
Well, yeah, ISIS is a very big topic, and I don't know if I want to discuss it much because I got a couple more points to make about this Ukraine situation. ISIS is a last resort. It's a Langley asset. It's a U.S. government security agency asset for assembling a bunch of guerrillas, very well organized, very well funded, very well trained, and a stern objective. The U.S. backed out of Iraq, removed its military, and immediately inserted its mercenaries for the purpose of capturing oil fields and capturing central bank gold and cash. So, exit the military, enter the mercenaries, no change. Constant war is the result. I want to make two final points regarding Ukraine here, Paul. The Human Rights Watch and OSCE, which is, I believe, a European human rights type of group, they are now poring over evidence that the Ukraine military, backed by the U.S. and NATO, has been using cluster bombs and phosphorus bombs against civilian targets. Now, for those who don't know, phosphorus was used in Rumallah in Iraq by the U.S. military. Think of it as something lighting up the sky, but as it gets closer and closer, it delivers 10,000-degree burns and melts people, burning them to death.
Right.
Okay, it has been declared long ago as taboo, and the U.S. used it on an experimental basis in Iraq. The U.S. used Vietnam as an experimental basis for a lot of weapons, and this is what they do. Hey, we have a new war. We're dealing with subhumans, so we're going to try some new weapons, see how they work out, because we've got a lot of contracts here with defense contractors and providers. So watch in the next month or so a lot of talk about war crimes, attacks on civilians. I mean, civilian attacks are not new. The U.S. is doing it in Syria, and an allied nation is doing it in Gaza. These are not new. Right. So look for that attention to come up. The last point is that in the truce accord struck in Minsk, there was a shuttle that went to the Kremlin. They conducted meetings in the Kremlin. They went back to Minsk. They signed things and signed the deal. And the deal, as I understand it, involves more forfeiting of territories to the separatists in the East than was even proposed a month ago. And the foreign minister of Russia made a very important point. He said, the longer the Ukraine regime waits, the weaker their position is going to be, and implies the more territory they're going to lose. But the big turning point was over 700 troops surrounded, encircled, and being bombarded in Debaltseve, the Debaltseve cauldron, including Blackwater troops. And they did something really kind of, almost humorous. The news network said that a corridor was created for letting out civilians. They weren't civilians. They were the 700 troops. So a humanitarian gesture by Putin. He did not slaughter them. And on the websites now, chat lines and various websites, and I've got some of it documented with links in the February report that's going to come out this week. I'm putting final touches on it right now. There are website links that show the chat lines, and you hear Ukrainian, you hear Polish, and you hear English.
Yes.
Okay? Those are your troops. The mercenaries working with the Ukrainian fascist regimes. They're bombing civilians. They got surrounded, and they were given no mercy until Putin stepped in and saw an opportunity for a truce. So, who deserves the Peace Prize? Obama or Putin?
Well, in this case, if this thing does hold up, I would say they should give it to Putin, Merkel, and Hollande.
I agree with you, and I have a joke that Obama should sell his so he can pay for the golf course fees.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic. Before you do, by the way, the story that you just said about the 700 troops, somebody else has sent me information, but they said it was more like 8,000 troops. But, anyways, who knows what the real number is.
Well, the 8,000 might have been in the whole area, but in the surround and captured, encircled area, I think it was 700. I wouldn't be at all surprised if 8,000 were surrounded in a bigger sense.
Yes, that's exactly.
Think of it kind of like in Baghdad, the green zone.
Right.
Well, the cauldron in Debaltseve was kind of like the green zone. But there's probably more to it, sure. I mean, we're talking about the imminent slaughter of a few thousand troops, many of whom are mercenaries.
And not only that, like a lot of them have been deserting the army, and even like generals apparently have just left their troops and taken off. The Ukrainian regular army soldiers. They're just deserting by the hundreds, anyways, maybe even the thousands.
Yes, I'm hearing the same thing. In fact, the reports, even in the truce accord articles, mention how the Ukraine army is dissolving.
Right.
Okay, enough.
Okay, so now moving right along, I have been reading of job slowdowns and massive inventory buildups on West Coast ports, like in Los Angeles, that are mainly controlled by the Chinese. Apparently, the just-in-time supply chain for retailers in the U.S. is being massively disruptive. So, Jim, what role is China playing with what is happening on the western ports out on the west coast of the U.S.? This happened in Vancouver too, but I think that's been resolved now.
Well, it's also happening in Portland, Oregon. I wouldn't expect that all is resolved in Vancouver. It's much more than Vancouver up in British Columbia. There's Port Richey and north of Vancouver. But I haven't heard yet about the resolution. Maybe there's some progress in Vancouver. The big issue is Los Angeles. It's the port of Long Beach. And some of the pictures that I see, I made a special request, and it was found on Zero Hedge. There were some special flights that were flown over Los Angeles in order to capture pictures of the dozens and dozens of ships that are just, waiting to come in. They're just, as they say, riding low. That's a phrase used for, say, an armored truck. That means it's got a lot of gold on board. But when the ships are riding low, it means that they've not offloaded yet.
Right.
They're still holding their, some of these ships are 1,000 feet long.
Yeah, they're gigantic, yes.
Take a close look, and you see that they're holding 200 to 300, maybe 400 containers, each of which is loaded off for a truck. Well, okay, I'm going to speak from my instinct. I think China is following through on a threat. Now, you could say, well, gee, the ports aren't loading, the longshoremen are on strike. There are no winners here. They're both losers. I think there might. This is very important, and I cannot confirm it because you can't say, well, I called Beijing and they told me, yeah, that's the case. No, it doesn't work that way. There's a lot of mystery to most of this global financial war. In every single element and battlefront and every single market that's intervened upon, I believe the Chinese are making good on a threat that they made back starting in November and December. They said, we're sick of the United States dishonoring global accords of a financial nature. They're sick of the United States creating a new war front in Ukraine instead of doing the global currency reset, which was agreed upon back in November and December of 2013. So 2-3 months later, the Ukraine war began. Its gold was stolen in Kiev, and the U.S. again blamed because reports came back that the gold from Ukraine went straight to the New York Fed. So was the war to steal gold and $70 billion of Ukrainian oligarch money that's sitting still now in Swiss banks? Here's what I believe is going on. I believe, and this is just me, it's not my team of colleagues, it's not The Voice. In fact, The Voice recently said, I don't know why China would do that. Well, here's what I think. The Chinese are trying to wreck the U.S. economy by disrupting its supply chain. They're not just halting Chinese imports into the U.S. economy, they're halting East Asian. That includes Korea, includes Japanese. All these ships are not unloading. And here's where it gets strange, Paul, because, I almost giggled when I read some of the articles in the last several days. The reports come out that these Chinese-owned ports are issuing official statements to the effect that they cannot afford the cost of unloading the ships. What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, now you have the Longshoremen Union seeing that there's a slowdown in the process and slowdown in activity, and they're upset because they're not being properly paid. So they're going out on strike, and they have a 4-day strike planned for 29 Western ports. That's a lot more than just Los Angeles. So you have the union longshoremen going on strike. You have the trucks lined up in queues that might have already been hooked up with a container. They're not going anywhere in the giant port facility. These are, just like 100 acres of port facilities. You have the ships floating at sea that are not entering the port, where all these large cranes and specialized equipment picks them up and puts them on the truck, with the empty tractor trailer. Nothing's happening. The irony is that the union's blaming the port managers and the port managers blaming the union. But take a look at the activity, and there's none. So it's kind of like, who fired the first shot in Kiev. It almost doesn't matter. But I look at the threat that China made several months ago, that the only way to drive out the corrupt and, what's the better word, evil leadership in the United States is to strangle the economy. What better way than the West Coast ports, which the Chinese all control, including Mexico and Canada and Brazil and Australia. There's no action done against Australia and New Zealand. I'm not implying that, but they could.
Right.
Who controls the ports? So this is getting very, very strange. We got flotillas at sea riding low, empty dock facilities, loaded trucks going nowhere, port managers backing out of contracts. But here's the big upshot. 3.5% of all U.S. gross domestic product, 1/30 of the entire U.S. economy, sees its flow through these ports.
Right. So this is not just, it's not just the dock workers or the ship guys that are being affected. This reverberates throughout the whole economy.
I think you're going to start seeing the public, the American public and the Canadian public, you're going to start seeing them screaming real soon, how come Walmart is empty? The U.S. leaders have for the longest time been lying about the economy, saying we have a recovery. Even Obama, in a State of the Union address, following that address, he said, where in the address he said we have a rebound in the U.S. economy, which is an absolute fiction. He's coming now before the Congress saying, now the economy is so strong, I want a bigger budget. So they lie about the economy, they lie about the housing market recovery, and you got huge durable orders miss and factory orders miss and wholesale ratio to sales, big jump up. All these major indicators are horrible. And the public is told the lies in the press. Now the public is going to see in the stores the shortages. So I told you a year ago that the effect of the dollar decay and the dollar demise, the petrodollar demise and the dollar replacement and new dollar launch, the effect's going to be price inflation, product shortages, and social disorder. I think we're at its edge right now.
Yeah, this would lead to all three of those things you just mentioned.
Yeah, and in addition to all that, you've got a disappearance of shellfish on the West Coast, so you're having shortages and price rises, and they're blaming it on acidity levels in the ocean. I don't think so. How about radioactivity?
Yes.
Which I really don't want to discuss. I made a vow to my own colleagues and myself. I'm not going to talk about radioactivity in West Coast.
But regardless, even in New Zealand just yesterday and the day before, they had like 140 whales beached, and it's like unprecedented how large that number is. They never see it in those kind of numbers. So there's something going on for sure. And
Well,
you're right.
in San Diego, they're reporting mammals being beached also.
Right.
They're just it's a form of whale and porpoise and seal suicide.
It is like fishes washing. It's much bigger story than is reported in the media. It is. I've never seen anything like it. So there's got to be a reason for it, and perhaps it is related to radioactivity. But like you said, we won't. This is not the forum to discuss that. Maybe another time.
I called it suicide. That's really not altogether accurate. It's a cry for help by these mammals, the seals, the dolphins, and the whales. Think of it as
they're being murdered. They're being murdered, you could say.
Well, maybe they're just rushing into the emergency ward and they think the beach is the hospital.
Right.
Okay, it's very complicated. We can't, ask them, but something's going on. Apart from the ports, we have a marine life crisis.
Sure we do. Sure we do. Okay, well, that's another story that's playing out right now, and yes, those consequences that you mentioned, like goods shortages and everything, we will definitely keep an eye out for that, and it is a distinct possibility that'll be happening soon. So, Jim, that's another good call on your part, for which I applaud you. Now
the Walmart shortages, Paul, that's not food.
That's it's like goods. It's like manufactured goods.
Right. Clothing, electronics, housewares. Look for shortages across all, starting in the West, retail chains.
Yes.
And the public is going to wake up. That will be the awakening signal for the public. They've gotten relief on the gasoline price, but they're going to see some deep distress for, buying that coveted CD.
Right.
All right.
Now, before we go, let's talk about your neck of the woods, what's happening down there. Beijing recently organized a summit for Caribbean and Latin American countries that, for the very first time, was held in Asia. So America's backyard is being bought by the Chinese, and the Russian influence in the region is now greater than ever. What is going on in Latin America, my friend?
Well, there was a meeting. They call it CELAC, CELAC. I don't know exactly what it stands for. Latin American countries, community.
Caribbean, yeah, something about Caribbean and right.
It's Latin American and Caribbean nations.
Right.
Okay. They're organizing. What their agenda is, without a lot of publicity in the U.S. press. The U.S. press might mention the meeting, but not a whole lot on what they're talking about. They're talking about usage. I'm sorry. They're talking about not using the dollar in trade settlement. That's what earned Saddam a hanging.
Right.
But earned Iran sanctions. That's what earned Ukraine. I'm sorry. That's what earned Russia the Ukraine war. Whenever a nation or group of nations decides they don't want to use the dollar, they get attacked, they have sanctions, they suffer hurricanes or earthquakes. This is the pattern. You have all South America now banding together with general discussions of no longer using the dollar in trade settlement. You have actually Brazil and Uruguay two
It,
nations that are
is,
not using the dollar right now.
is this why Brazil's currency is being attacked too? That's been really stressed lately.
Well, that's part of the strong dollar, or I should say rising dollar toward its death. When it reaches a certain level, the dollar is going to be dead. You can't have the dollar going up without other currencies going down. So,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of not exactly a zero-sum game, but think of it as a teeter-totter. You got a big guy sitting on one end. Well, okay, that means the other end's going way up. So you have trade problems with the Brazil economy. You have debt problems with the Brazil economy. When the dollar goes up, all the foreign-held debt in dollar terms becomes unmanageable. Lots of different emerging market nations are struggling with their banks because they can't handle the dollar-based loans that just jumped up for the loan balance. All right, apart from all that, Latin America is banding together. They've got a trade union called Mercosur, M-E-R-C-O-S-U-R. It's kind of two words banded together. Mercado means market and sur means south. So it's a South American market. Mercosur, I think, is going to emerge as a pretty strong contender as a trade union. And they're going to conduct a lot of trade without the dollar in South America. Now, I don't know about Central America. Central America is a very interesting mix. It's checkered. You have Panama, which is largely controlled by the U.S. for its banks, including. But Colombia's got a significant role in there. You have the Chinese operating the canal, so Panama's a mix. In Costa Rica, you have again another mix. The United States controls the banks, the borders, the airports. But the Chinese are very significantly involved in individual projects. This is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is a mix. In Nicaragua, you have zero U.S. presence. You have the Russians involved very heavily in the technology side, installing 3G satellite. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word satellite.
Cellular networks.
Cellular network, right. 3G cell networks with towers and linking in with cable television. When I go to Nicaragua, I don't have any trouble at all watching cable TV, including U.S. sports. I watch, Monday Night Football a couple times and some bowl games when I went there for the holiday. Big deal. I love going there. The weather is unbelievably beautiful in Nicaragua. If you like 85-degree sun with not much humidity, I mean, tough sun. You need a hat. You got to be careful. If you're doing some sunbathing, you better limit it to 20 minutes or maybe even 10. I've gotten sunburned in Nicaragua several times. Gorgeous weather. But, let's just run down some of these Latin American countries. Whenever you talk about Central America and South America, they lump it together by calling it Latin America. And to be sure, some of the Caribbean is not Latin American, like Jamaica. That's not Latin America. That's British and African. So you've got, Brazil and China in a long-standing relationship that's going on since about 2006, featuring the yuan swap facility. You've got China in Venezuela with debt relief. Russia is in there also with certain projects. The Chinese have gotten commitments for some of the Venezuelan oil. You have China now with a very large, significant. I've been skeptical a bit on this canal project in Nicaragua. I studied its not so much from a formal engineering standpoint, but from a practical construction angle, and I thought, oh, this is just not practical. And now I have an actual friend who's an engineer, and he gave me his own rundown of the canal, and he thinks that you're going to have tremendous problems with this $50 billion canal project that goes through Lake Nicaragua, which they call Cochibolca, I think. Anyway, he thinks they're going to have regular annual dredging requirements and shut down the canal because of, erosion and silt. It's not well planned, and the construction firm in charge of the Nicaraguan canal has no experience in canals. So, okay, that's Nicaragua, but take a close look at the plans for the.
Nonetheless, it's like a large investment that the Chinese have committed to in that region.
It is, but take a close look, Dash, at the plans, and you see airports, new airport, and new marine bases. Can you say Chinese naval base?
Yes.
Okay, so if they have problems later, or if Nicaragua seeks additional stakes in, corporate development or whatever, Nicaragua's a tough place to do, capital formation. That's my euphemistic description. When I looked at the plans, my eyes fixated on the naval base and the airports. And I thought, Chinese, Russian naval base, Air Force base. So look down the road for any kind of debt default or problems, and you're going to see deals cut where the Chinese come in to offer protection. So you've also got the Russians and Chinese involved in countries like Peru for energy projects. Another one that really caught my eye, because it's so close to the U.S., was Cuba. Russia and China, spaced a month apart, had heads of states visiting, offering infrastructure, commercial development, funding. The Russians offered some debt relief from the old Soviet debt to Cuba. And an element that also caught my attention was how the Russians planned to develop the Mariel seaport. And again, I'm thinking down the road, if there's some debt default, the Mariel port, which was infamous for dumping, prisoners on Florida's coastline, straight out of Mariel. It was called the Mariel Refugees. If we have some debt default in Cuba, Russia will turn Mariel into a naval base, a military naval base. So,
that's probably why Obama is now eager to open up, with Cuba again.
Well, he may be eager, but he couldn't even make the first step. In some recent meetings, the Cubans announced, no change, sorry, we're not interested. So what the U.S. offered was some, opening the embassy and putting in some, freshly planted agents who can do some more active information gathering for Langley. This is old hat stuff that these nations won't tolerate anymore. All right, now Mexico. The Mexicans did something interesting. I think it was in 2013. They opened up their Pemex to outside consulting and exploration. So the Mexican national oil industry is available for bids on exploration and development and operation and refineries inside Mexico. And I noticed very, in a stark manner, the U.S. oil companies did not rush in. The Russians did.
Very strange that they didn't.
Right. So, we're going to see a lot of Latin American trade develop, and I think they're going to start using the Chinese currency, or the RMB. Still, people get confused. RMB stands for renminbi, which is a Chinese word for people's money. So the renminbi is the Chinese yuan. RMB is just a neat, quick way of talking about Chinese currency. The Latin Americans are going to start trading among themselves in their national currencies and in RMB. It's going to grow, and one little asterisk footnote. The Russians are all over Latin America for food purchase contracts.
So, Jim, we keep reading in the Western press about how Russia is being surrounded and China is being surrounded by NATO and the Americans. So it seems like the opposite is happening, where America has on its borders now, like you said, with the Russians investing in Mexican energy and everything else. So it seems like the Russians and the Chinese are on the borders more so than NATO is on the borders of Russia.
Yeah, there's another way of looking at this. When the U.S. started the sanctions and the Europeans joined the sanctions against Russia, Russia immediately started joining in enormous ways, multilateral joining with China. We're talking about energy, we're talking about investment, foreign direct investment, we're talking about the pipelines, we're talking about port facilities, we're talking about railroads, we're talking about a lot of different, commodity provision, lots and lots of different contracts on many levels between Russia and China. Then they started talking about the Eurasian trade zone and former Soviet republics doing trade outside the dollar in Russian ruble primarily. And then you had the BRICS alliance extending to over 100 nations. The BRICS nation movement is now over 100 nations. So you could say that after Russia and China developed Asia and Latin America and Eastern Europe and lots of nations.
And Africa.
And Africa, sure, that Russia and China have brought about an isolation of 90% of the world. In other words, the United States has 10% of the world with them on their side. The United States has earned isolation as Russia and China have brought about a union of nations with alliances and organizations for 90% of the world. So how are your sanctions working out, Washington?
See, this is what I wanted to, yeah, exactly. All this story you keep reading of Russia's economy is hurting. When you look at Putin, he seems to be playing from a position of strength. He doesn't look like a cornered rat to me.
No, he stood back and allowed Ukraine to sink. Exactly what I told you back in April and May of last year.
You did. Yes, you did.
He is stepping back. In fact, he let Merkel act as the truce emissary for the surrender of Ukraine. And the only nation that did not sign it is the United States. Now, I should say the European Union as a nation did not sign it. Neither did the United States sign it. Canada has not yet recognized it. Canada was also supplying some lethal weapons to Ukraine. But, all these sanctions result in isolation of the United States. The sanctions against Iran brought about an oil for gold formula. The protocol was developed for non-dollar settlement. I mean, every time the United States offers sanctions, you get closer to the death of the dollar. And that's what's coming. I don't know when, but it's coming. And we're going to see some events real soon, some deep distress events. I'm not going to say default, but some deep distress events in the gold market. So,
well, do you want to just finish off on that when you said?
No, I don't have anything more to say on that. We're going to see it.
All right,
it's coming, and the stress factors are building. The Chinese New Year is Thursday, the 19th. I was told that as we lead up to the Chinese New Year, look for an acceleration of events with breakdown, and after the New Year, look for some actual breakdown, market distress, and big change. So it's coming.
Well, on a final note, I just recently read that, China is now ready to share advanced military technologies with China. Well, Russia is now ready to share advanced military technologies with China, which is going to make China even a big military superpower in addition to being a manufacturing superpower.
Yeah, I think it goes further than that. I think France and Russia are sharing technology too. This is game over for the U.S. keeping Europe on a leash. The Europeans just cut the leash.
They did. I would agree with you there. Okay, Jim. So before we close off, can you please go ahead and share your contact information and any other information about your services and about yourself that you want to share with the listeners?
Sure. The website is www.goldenjackass.com. This April will be 11 years. It's quite the wagon train. We're having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of success with correct forecasts. The Voice just paid me a compliment a few days ago and said that he's received a number of what he calls high-level communications, like phone calls and emails from individuals in seats of power and elsewhere, just contacts of his, consulting clients of his, where they noted that the hat-trick letter has a long sequence of correct forecasts and a very effective layout of the future landscape. So that was high praise, high compliment. I really value that a lot. But on the Golden Jackass website, www.goldenjackass.com, there's the hat-trick letter. We've got a monthly publication now. It's called the Global Money War Report. Includes currencies, banks, central banks, gold, economies. What I'm trying to do now is avoid the endless array of supporting stories. Like, I could go on and on about the new dead bankers, but no, we had an incident just the last few days. New York train. Gosh, of the fatalities, the majority were important Wall Street members. So what is going on? I mean, you could speculate all you want. My point is that I'm trying to focus on the really critical stories regarding the death of the dollar, regarding the broken central bank franchise system, regarding the shutdown of the COMEX, regarding the return of the gold standard, regarding isolation of the United States as a rogue nation. And, maybe in a year from now, we're going to be talking about a paradigm shift of some very significant events. I try to focus on the important stories, Paul, and it's a labor of love. It's a lot of work, and I'm fortunate to be in this position. I've loved my last few jobs. I've got some things that I'm not really satisfied with. Here's something I really miss as a statistical analyst with a doctorate. I miss analyzing large data sets. I miss cleaning them. I miss analyzing good quality, high integrity data sets and coming up with, hypothesis tests and recommendations for businesses. That's what a marketing research analyst did. That's what I used to do. But anyway, this is a labor of love. It's a very important work. I don't have actual statistics to do, but I recently came up with one that's very interesting. We've had, this is the Shemitah. Every 7 years, we tend to have a very significant event in the nature of a crisis. So let me just read backwards. I'm assuming that 2015 is the beginning of the petrodollar demise, the rejection of the dollar and return of the gold standard. That's the 2015 crisis. I'm going to just go backwards and point out all the crises that were 7 years apart. with a little commentary. 2008 was the Lehman failure with the kill job, the climax of the subprime mortgages that started the year before. 2001, another 7 years. 9/11, the inside job, Patriot Act, all the nonsense, all the pretty much installation of the fascist state. Following a year before the tech telecom bust. 1994 was the Mexican peso tequila crisis. It was a crisis warning by Greenspan on the irrational exuberance. 1987, again, 7 years, Black Monday. That was pretty much an aftershock of a lot of outsourcing for the United States and the economy. 7 years before that was 1980, the Hunt brothers and the crisis regarding oil and silver. 7 years before, 1973, Arab oil embargo, the birth of the petrodollar, executed by the Kissinger shuttle between Washington and the Arab states, principally the Saudis. Now, I stopped there as 7 events, 7 years apart, and to keep a generalized event, because, you could still have the event being satisfied 7 years apart if it were, say, 1985, 1992, 1999, okay? That's why I focus on 49 years. I had a moron give me a lot of crap using my Contact Us, telling me that I had holes in my argument. No, I don't. He has holes in his head. You've got to generalize the event in order to characterize and calculate the probability. So, what's the probability that 49 different years had 7 different baskets? Question: do you think this is more than just the credit cycle showing itself, manifesting itself in a crisis every 7 years? I don't think so. I think some of this is kind of programmed. Now, just so you get an idea that this is not just the last 49 years, I did a little research, put our heads together with my colleagues, go back more 7-year stretches. 1966, silver was removed from U.S. coins. We had a climax of the Vietnam War protests. LBJ decided not to run again, and you had a very significant U.S. credit crisis. 1959, Cuba. U.S. lost Cuba as as a casino location, bringing about the birth of Las Vegas. But the U.S. lost Cuba. Castro had his communist revolt. 1952, a couple of events. One's serious and one's humorous. The United States detonated its first hydrogen bomb, and the jackass was born.
So your point here, Jim, is that you expecting something significant this year?
Yes, I am. I'm not done. 1945, the end of World War II. And Western global control, hegemony, if you will, transfers hands from the British to the Americans. 1938, Hitler came to power after seizing control of the German army and certain industries. So from 1938 to 2015, you have these 7-year cycles, and to be sure, the year before might have had some significant lead-in events, call them preliminary shock waves, leading to the crisis climax. So, yes, I believe 2015 is going to be a crisis-filled year, and Desh, I'll say it right here, I've been saying it for a while, going to be bigger than the Lehman crisis.
Okay, that would make it really significant. Jim, I regrettably have to run, as do you. So I want to thank you. I know how busy you are, that you've taken this time, and you have shared some really, really phenomenal information with me and the listeners. And so I wish you a good day, and we will talk again soon.
Okay, it's my pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity to give information and a kind of a breaking news item of the Swiss banks not redeeming accounts on withdrawal of funds.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me on.
You take care.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.
We all have enough. Darkened secrets we're hiding. We all feel the pain. All alone, we've been crying. But we can't find our way into the light. Jesus shows the way out of the darkness. Little games we play, in the darkness to blind us. In our graves we lay, wondering how they could find us. But we can find our way into the light. Jesus shows the way out of the darkness. Who can we blame for our dark, hellish prison? Will you speak my name? Am I the one? Am I the reason? No, we can find our way into the light. Jesus shows the way.